Welcome to today's tutorial where you will be learning how to create a classified document type of animation in After Effects. So as you can see in the example, there is some text, an animated camera, some depth of field, and an animation that classifies some information in a document. To get started, I just have a texture of some paper and another texture that kind of looks like a wall, but just basically any kind of slightly grungy texture. So to get started, you're going to make a new composition, and it's going to be 1920 by 1080, and we're going to make it 10 seconds long, and let's call this main comp. So that's going to be our main composition here, where you're going to animate the camera view and everything like that. Now let's go ahead and pick out our texture for the paper, and I'm going to drop it into a new composition, and I'm going to rename this paper. Perfect. Let's change the name of this by hitting enter and calling it BG for background. And I'm going to make it vertical by going to composition settings and just changing the numbers. So this is going to be 2592. And if your image is already vertical, you don't have to worry about this. There we go, just flipped it over. And that's just so I can have some extra space for the text. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the text type tool, and I'm going to select an area where I'm going to place my text. And I'm going to give it a border on the left and right. That way you can have some space for when the camera is moving. That way it's kind of centered in the middle. I'm just going to copy over my text, which I basically just got from Wikipedia. And I'm using the font Helvetica because I feel like it's a pretty plain font. A lot of people use it, so this is it here. I think this looks pretty good. This is basically the way it's laid out on the page. I might make it just a little bit smaller. That is looking good. So the next step is we're going to go to our main comp, and we're going to drop in our paper. So right now it drops in and it's kind of cropped, but you're not going to really worry about that too much. Just go and make the layer 3D by clicking this cube here. And we're going to right click and go to New, Camera, and make sure to check Enable Depth of Field. Perfect. Now the next step that I'm going to be doing is I'm going to go up here and select the Camera tool. What that lets you do is if you just left click and drag, you can rotate the camera around the object. If you right click and drag, you can zoom in and out. And if you click with the middle mouse key, you can actually move around in the X and Y coordinates. And if you don't have the middle mouse button, you can just click and hold the camera tool, and then you can see track X and Y camera tool, and then select it separately and just click and move it around. But I'm going to be using the unified camera tool because you can do everything inside of one tool. And what I'm going to do now is kind of position the text in a way that I can have some nice depth on it. I'm thinking something like this. You know, you have a piece of paper and it looks like a camera is kind of filming the text here, something at an interesting angle. And you're going to go to the camera, transform, and I would just check all of these to set the keyframes. And let's go to something like 5 seconds. And I'm going to just move it a little bit over, maybe rotate just very slightly. So now you can see the animation. the camera's basically moving through the piece of paper. We have that set up, so let's go to the paper and start adding our textures. So as you can see right now, the text is pretty plain. It's just black material that's on the paper. And what we want to simulate is, maybe like the printer ink, or if you're doing a handwritten note, you could use a handwritten font, but we need a texture on the black text. And for that, we're going to use the second material, and I'm going to put it right under the text. And you can see I have it here, but I'm just going to scale it up. Perfect. And for track matte, I'm going to select alpha matte. And it might be hard to see, but it's actually using the material to cut out the text. Now to fix that, I'm going to go to the effects and presets, or if you can't find it, just go to window, effects and presets, and I'm going to choose levels. And I'm going to drag it to our texture. So I'm going to actually rename this to texture, just so it's easy to follow along. And what you're going to do is you're going to drag the left side, which is the shadows, down until it's pretty dark. And then you're going to select tint, and you're going to drop that, and that's going to get rid of any color that you have. So if you might notice, it's a little bit blue, and once I throw the tint on, it just makes everything black. So as you can see, it adds a nice texture to the text. So that is set, and that is good to go. Let's go ahead and create the actual animation of the highlighter or the blackout effect. I'm just gonna see what's in the shot. So I'm gonna black out the co-founder and initial chairman. I'm just gonna black that part out, which is right here. And to do that, you're gonna make a new layer and go to layer, new, solid, and you're gonna make it black, and you're gonna make it comp size. Hit OK. And one of the things you gotta do is you gotta make sure that the solid isn't 100% black. I just have it about 5%. So you can see here when you're dragging the values, 100% is white, 0% is black, and I did about 5%. So it's dark, 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 dark gray. You're gonna turn off the layer, go to your rounded rectangle tool, and with the dark layer selected, you're gonna click and drag the shape around the text you want to black out. Perfect. Now if you turn that on, you can see that this doesn't really look too great, but that is okay, because right now you're just animating the section. So what you're going to do now is get the normal rectangle tool, and again with the layer selected, I'm just going to go about halfway. So now it's called mask 2, and change that to subtract. So now anything within that box is getting rid of our original mask. Let's go ahead to about 15 seconds or 20 frames. Sorry, we're going to go to 20 frames, and we're going to keyframe the mask path. And I'm going to take these 2 points and make sure that it's out of the way. Then I'm going to go about a second forward and bring it out so that it reveals the text. And I'm gonna select both keyframes, right click, go to keyframe assistant, and choose easy ease. What that does, it makes the animation start slower and end slower. And here it might be going a little too fast, so I'm just gonna move the keyframes farther apart to make it a bit slower. Perfect. So now let's make that actual blackout look. So let's call this layer marker. And in our effects and presets, you're going to find roughen edges. You can take that, drop it on your marker layer, and let's hide our mask shapes so we can take a look at this marker layer. You can crank up the complexity to make the shape more complex. So I'm going to bring it to about 10. And sometimes you might notice you're not really seeing it here, but if you start really bringing at the border, sometimes it ends up having like a sharp line. And you can fix that by going into the mask and bringing down your mask expansion. And that's if you're having that problem. I'm not seeing it here, so but in your case, if you have that, that's the way to fix it. You would just bring down the mask expansion. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna see a comfortable amount. I think this amount looks pretty comfortable. It looks like a marker. Looks like a marker that went around and bled through the paper. Now the next step is you can see that when the marker is being painted, it just appears. It doesn't look like there's a transition that's going on. And you can fix that by going to your mask 2, which is the one that reveals the text. And you can start feathering it. So in the mask feather, you can start bringing this out. And you can see that adds a really nice intricate effect of the marker being drawn on. And depending on how much you add it, adds the trail. So that's basically the way you can control the trail. So that looks good. But another little touch that I like to add to it is, you know, sometimes when you're running the marker, it doesn't completely cover the text fully. So for that, select your marker layer, hit T to pull up the opacity. And I would set it to maybe 90. That's a little too much. 95. So you can see that you can kind of see the text through it. Maybe we'll make it to 96. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. So when it's covering it up, it's not completely covering it up. Maybe a little bit more, 97. That looks good. Once we add more post effects in the main comp, you'll see that that's really going to help add some detail in. So now when you play back the animation, you see there's that really nice marker feel going over the text. And once again, I'm just going to slow it down a little bit more just to make it pretty dramatic. And you can see that you're starting to get somewhere with this effect. Now it's all up to the additional post-production here. And I'm going to stop at a frame around here just so we can kind of see everything that we are doing. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my camera, go to camera options. And I usually crank the blur level to something like 800. And that's temporary. You just want to get the point of focus and we don't want it to calculate too long. So you're going to take our focal distance and move it around until maybe 500. Let's make it 300 and move around our focus distance to try to get the text in focus. Okay, perfect. So let me just crank it a little more. And you can start to see that you're getting that focus point to be on the text that is getting blacked out. So now we can go back to blur level, make it something more realistic like 100, and just crank the aperture higher. That's looking pretty good. So you can see we're starting to get that text out of focus in the back, getting that out of focus text in the front, getting that nice macro effect. And maybe the blur level is just going to be set to 120. Now what you might notice is the blurring looks pretty bad, and that's because we have fast rectangle, and I have never seen a rectangular aperture in my life. So I would suggest changing it to at least a hexagon with 6 blades or a nonagon with 9 blades. I'm going to go with a nonagon, and you can see that it's a lot nicer, more realistic soft focus that you're getting here. And now that we've figured out our focus, we can just turn off the depth of field for now and continue working on more effects. So right click, go to new, adjustment layer, and let's call this CC. That's for color correction. And we're gonna once again get our favorite levels effect and bring it in here. Typically these kind of scenes, either in movie titles or show titles or some documentaries, they're usually pretty intense. So lots of contrast, your eye is going straight to the middle. So we're gonna try to help the viewer look exactly where we want them to look. And that's where the depth of field was helping us, and now we're gonna do the same thing with the color correction. So we're gonna take our white and we're gonna crush it slightly. Right here. And then we're going to take our contrast and crush it a bit as well. So you can see this is where our 90%, 97% gray is really helping this blend together. Now another thing is we're going to add a little vignette, and you can do that by going to new, adjustment layer, and let's call this vignette. I might have misspelled it, but that's okay. We're going to take levels, drop it on top, and we're going to take the white and just start bringing it in until it's pretty dark. And then you're going to go to your masks, choose the ellipse tool, double click it, which automatically makes a circular shape around your whole layer. And we're going to bring out the settings, change this to subtract, and we're going to start feathering this a lot more. That's looking pretty good. And the way you can control the darkness of the vignette is by the levels control here. So you can see if you bring it in more left, you get a more intense one. And if you bring it more out, you get it less intense. And if you want the shape to change, you go to your mask settings and you can change with mask expansion. And you can blur it more by feathering it in. I think this is getting to a point where it looks good. And our last step is going to be to simulate some grain. So let's make a new adjustment layer and let's call it grain. And in our effects and presets, we are going to type in grain and choose the add grain effect. That adds this box here, which is the preview region. So I'm going to move it over to where you can see a text and some of the box. And as you can see, it might be harder to see it in YouTube because of the compression. But when you apply this effect, you'll see that the darker areas get a lot more grain. And the grain is going to be moving. So when your video is playing, it's going to really help sell that documentary type effect. So go ahead to color and choose monochromatic. And that adds black and white noise instead of colored noise. And for viewing mode, we're going to change it to final output. So now the grain, the color correction, and if you turn on the depth of field on the camera, this really helps us achieve that nice documentary feeling or film looking classified document effect. You can use it in many different ways to simulate markers, highlighters, pens, or anything else you could come up with. Hopefully this tutorial was helpful and you can use it in your own projects. If you like this video, be sure to leave a like. If you have any questions, make sure to comment down below and I'll try to answer them. And don't forget to subscribe and turn the bell icon to be notified when I make more tutorials. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.